This week I read an interesting article on what's called status quo bias. Simply put, it's a psychological kind of theory research that says that when we're given a choice between what we know, what we have, what we do, and a new alternative, most of us, most of the time, are likely to choose the status quo, that which we know, that which we're comfortable with, that with which we're familiar. It's not always the case, but most commonly. That sticking with the status quo only increases when there are more choices. When there are more new choices before us, we are more likely to stick with the status quo. Because it's not just choosing between the old and the new, but between the two new ones or the three or four or whatever it is. Most of us are much more comfortable with where we're at and what we're doing. A consumer advocate on the radio this week was talking about how consumers are losing out on a lot of savings as their mobile or internet or energy or insurance plans or streaming plans come to an end after 6, 12, 24 months, whatever it is, and they automatically revert back to the standard fees. The corporations will tell us this, but it's easier and more comfortable to stay with what we know and what we do than to embrace something new. To do the work of researching, of comparing, and of changing over. We're more comfortable with what we know. We fear change. Change comes with risk, uncertainty, unknown. And we don't always know what to do with it, how to embrace it, or what it'll mean. It brings discomfort within us, and we're not sure. And yet we live in a time of momentous change, a time when there is more change than we've known. You know, the last couple of years with COVID-19 have seen enormous changes. We're emerging into this new phase of living with COVID-19. For most of us, the restrictions and the lockdowns were difficult. It was difficult as a society, as a world, to negotiate new things, new ways. There became stresses and troubles for business and jobs and family and mental health. But at the same time, most of us got out and walked more locally in streets and parks and bush tracks, recognising the sun and the birds and the sky, the stillness, a quieter way of being. Those who could work from home found new, perhaps joys or challenges or freedoms without having to travel hours each day or do work in that work environment. We could do it at home in our own comfort, coming and going, perhaps more efficient, more time with the family. Others found it more difficult and challenging because work had to be done outside the house and it couldn't always be done. Businesses struggled, and many people found that online shopping was much easier. You can go online, you can go through the different specials and compare and contrast, order, pay, and it's delivered to your door. Food and meals were delivered to your door. A new way of buying and being, which changes the way that bricks and mortar shops interact with the world and the way corporations and businesses, small and large, do their business. COVID-19 changed so much of how we think about ourselves, having more time by ourselves to deal with who we are, to wrestle with who we are in this world, without some of the distractions and the lifestyles that we're used to, learning to do things in different ways. We're challenging and difficult, confronting, but also offered new alternatives. As we emerge back into a new normal, many people want to go back to what was and claim what was in their groups, in their communities, in their businesses, in their lives, regain control and go back to what we knew and how we did it. But we can't. The world is different. It's moved on. not only through COVID-19, but these last decades have been very different in the world. The rise of this new far-right conservatism, sometimes religious and often secular, threatening the ways that nations have done things and the relationships with other nations. Democracy, as we know it, is under threat, challenged. The world's largest democracy, the US, have a democratic election. A democratically elected president is opposed by a large slab of the population who don't agree with it, who storm the Capitol protesting. There's the rise of the so-called strongman, these dictatorial leaders in Russia, China, North Korea, and parts of the Middle East. But Donald Trump, in his own way, was a Western version of that. It's a new way in the world, and it threatens the stability in so many different ways. The war, or the invasion of Ukraine, is a particularly poignant moment. Vladimir Putin thumbing his nose at the world. This horrific evil perpetrated on innocent people. The world has changed, moved on its axis, moved on. And yet we want to try and hold what we know and what we have and what we're secure with. But we can't. Not fully anyway. And we see this in our churches, in our community organisations, in our sporting clubs, and we see it in our world of business and the corporate world, the political world, the world we know. The status quo holds us, and we're afraid of the change that we're expected to embrace. This week we continue to read stories of Easter, and I think Easter is a story that challenges the status quo, that challenges the way things are. It invites us to let go and trust in this unknown, in this thing, this mystery we call resurrection, the risen Christ, who invites us into a new future. A way that is about justice and love and inclusion and hope and peace and life. And we don't know what that means. And we don't know what it means to let go. To let go of our belief systems. To let go of our religiosity. To let go of our control of life. Our money, our possessions, our career, our ambitions, our drive, and our violence. And this week we read a couple of readings. There's a story of Saul, as he was known in Jewish circles, Paul in the wider Roman Empire. This religious zealot, this fanatic of Judaism, who was so incensed by this rise of Christianity and this way, this new way of being that challenged and threatened everything he knew in his Jewish faith, who held to the rigid law and who fought, persecuted the Christians to maintain what he knew and what was, as did so many others. And Paul hangs on rigidly to what he knows and what he can control. It may not be perfect, it may not even be all right, but it's what we have. It's tradition, it's what we've always done. And yet, on the way to persecuting Christians in Damascus, he's struck by a blinding light and a voice that calls out to him and says, Paul, what are you doing? Why are you persecuting me? And he says, who are you? I am the Christ who you persecute. For Paul, it's a radical intrusion into his life that invites him into a new way. And the risk for him is, do I hang on to what I know and risk what I don't know? And risk not going in the way that God may be calling me. He is so challenged and transformed in this moment that he cannot but respond to the call to go into the world and proclaim peace and reconciliation. That this God whom he worships, who comes out and is known in the Jewish tradition, is also known and revealed in this way of Christ. This way of love, peace, of hope, of reconciliation. And the one who was fanatical and exclusive becomes the one who proclaims openness and says that in Christ there are no barriers. There are no male and female, Jew and Gentile or Greek, no slave or free. And none of the barriers that we want to name and hold up hold true in Christ. He breaks them all down. And we're all one in this new way. And in another story, disciples who have experienced the grief and the confusion and the puzzle of Easter don't know what to do. So they return to what they know, fishing. And they go out and they fish all night and it's no good, they catch nothing. And there's this stranger on the shore who yells out, "Put your nets on the other side." What's it going to do? Like lugging these heavy nets up, dragging them over and putting them on the other side of the boat, a few metres away. What difference? Same water, same ocean. But they do it. For some reason they do it. And they get this enormous catch. It says 153 fish. I don't know what that means. I'm not sure anyone does. Maybe it's just a lot of fish. They do something different. They listen and it's different. They go up on the beach and Peter is confronted by this risen Christ who asks him 3 times, "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, you know I do." "Go and feed my sheep, my ones, my little ones, my people." 3 times, countering the 3 betrayals of Peter, liberating him from shame and guilt and all of that to do a new thing. Peter is embraced into this new way, as are the disciples. And they will leave their fishing yet again because they're called into this mission of the risen Christ, the mission that Jesus began. And it seems that the risen Christ is not about a figure, a person, but it's about the mission of God in the world. And this risen Christ invites people into the mission, into this way of reconciliation, this way of love, this way of hope and of peace for all people. This generous love of God, proclaiming and living it in the world. In a world that uses violence and goes to war. In a world that denies hope and peace to some people and gives more to others. That gives wealth into the hands of a few and power and control to the hands of a few. And many others are oppressed and suffering. This way of God turns all that upside down and says that's not the way of life. And you don't have to live in that way. It's a way of love and hope for everyone. And that's what Easter's all about, and that's what it's calling us into, inviting us to live in a way that's new, which means let go. And that might be letting go of the status quo of our churches, the status quo of our lives, of our careers, of our money, of our power. Letting go and trusting in this way of resurrection and new life, this way of love and reconciliation for the world. What about you? What's it calling you to? And will you follow in this way of Christ?